John Bozowski is a seasoned veteran working with Comcast for a number of years. He's, in his words, I believe this, is passionate about scaling infrastructure and platforms while being obsessed with customer experience and value. So over the years, John's been recognized as a leader across the industry for driving large-scale, innovative, and transformational initiatives. John has held numerous roles over the past 25 years, many related to cable broadband, and was most recently the CTO and Vice President of Product Engineering and Infrastructure at Machine Q, a Comcast company. This will be John's 11th time presenting at NANOG. His first talk was a tutorial on IPv6 and DOCSIS during NANOG 45 in 2009 in the Dominican Republic. John's talk today will be IPv6, the next 10 years. I think we're all looking forward to this. John, it's good to have you back, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. I want to try not to break this clicker. That guy's going to get mad at me if I do. Yeah, it's kind of funny. I look back. I mean, first and foremost, huge thanks to Valerie for tolerating my tardiness. Yesterday, the slides came in. Had a request this morning just to confirm that we can take questions today. So, Valerie, eternal thanks to you. And then, I don't know about you all, but this is the first time I've seen this many people in one place together. You know, many longtime friends. So, big shout out to NANOG, community for getting us all together here. I mean, I know we're not all here. Last time I was at a NANOG, according to my Googling, was about 6 years ago, and I think we were topping out around 1,000 people. Thinner crowd today, but COVID considering, we're doing all right. So big thanks to NANOG and Aaron for having us here today, getting us all together. Wednesday, the last day of NANOG, is tough slot to compete with, mostly hangovers, I assume, but I'm glad to see there's a lot of people in the room here. I will do my best to not bore you. When I was talking to Alex and Tina and others about the invitation to come here, and they said, hey, you want to do a talk at NANOG, and then I think the suggestion was V6. I said, really? We're still talking about V6? I haven't touched anything V6 in 5 years. So I was like, okay, so what do you guys want to talk about? So went back and forth with Alex. He was also very tolerant of delayed email responses. And we came up with what we're going to talk about today. So I want to break today up in three pieces of the conversation. A little history for those of you who may need a little bit of a refresher or some intro. Talk a little bit about the current state of affairs, and then we'll dive into what we think maybe will be the next 10 years. Hopefully not 20, and if it is 20, then hopefully I still don't have any gray hair by then. So ultimately what prompted kind of the request to Valerie to take questions today is I had lunch with some folks yesterday, and we were kind of going over some of these things, and there was the sentiment that there would be some interesting topics of conversation amongst the community here as far as what happens next, from a V6 perspective. So what I'm going to do is kind of give you a little bit of background. I'm not here to try to convince you to do anything you don't want to do. Hopefully that was never the case. Not here to, the sky's not falling. I'm not here to give you a pep talk by any stretch of the imagination. I have nothing to pep you up about at the moment. And I hope the next time I come back here, I could do something with Bert from yesterday about decentralized networking, blockchain, cryptocurrency, something like that. And we're not talking about V6. But for now, let's dive into V6. So this is not a pep talk, absolutely not. But we are going to talk a little bit about history. So this whole, preparing for this kind of took me down memory lane back to 2011, 2012, hanging out with some of the best friends I've ever made in this industry, all over the place. Silicon Valley, the iSoc people, Yahoo, Google, Facebook, etc. And we were all planning for those two things right there. World V6 Day, World V6 Launch. Truth be told, many of us were working on V6 5, 6 years before this. And I mean, it's taken that long in some ways. We've Further Googling, I probably really got to know John Curran and the Aaron crew about 17 years ago at a Aaron meeting in Orlando. That's where I met Dan, right? And 2005. Wow, I mean, it's like 16 years later. Wow, okay. So 2011 rolls around, 6 years later, we're getting the party started, because up until then, V6 was really just, it was really being evaluated for use for internal management purposes, getting infrastructure ready. This was a game changer here, where we really started to kind of lay the groundwork to take V6 to people, right, and use it for other things that were, what I'll call broadly internet facing. But what we found over the years, what I found over the years, is that adoption varies dramatically, like beauty in the eye of the beholder, right? It doesn't mean the same thing to everybody, right? So early days, there was, the intent to leverage V6 to, manage a network, infrastructure, what have you. You talk to different people like Paul Saab at Facebook and what they've done, Cameron Byrne at T-Mobile. All different use cases, all different adoption models. You look across the broadband industry, same deal, right? So as I thought about today, this, as I reflected, became something that I felt was pretty important to kind of just highlight for folks as to really what different folks' motivations were and are for V6. A little bit of history. I promise I will not belabor this. All the slides are available. You guys can look at this separately, but I will touch tips of waves here. I wish Jeff was here, not only because he's an amazing speaker, but he is just, Jeff Houston from APNIC, the data he makes available is, amazing. So I'm plagiarizing Jeff, but I'm doing my best to acknowledge. If you look at this growth, from, the past, I guess he's been tracking this since, 2014, huge growth across adoption. And when I look at Jeff's graphs here, this is really about broadband. It's about the eyeballs, right? But the interesting thing about his information, and maybe he's online, hopefully he'll comment if he is, by these numbers, globally, 100% adoption happens in 20 years. I really hope we're not talking about this in 20 years. If you go to the US view, it's 7. We'll talk a little bit about what that means here in a minute when it comes to V4. But either way, we still have a ways to go. But what you'll see here in subsequent slides is there's been a lot of progress made over the past many years. I mean, in particular since 2011, 2012. But when I sat back and did the math, and I hope somebody asks or maybe has some insight around the decline here, because if you go back to the global view, there's some flattening. If you go to the US view here, it's slightly on the decline. I think that's worth a conversation. But I don't know if it's really worth spending the rest of the time talking about, but it is worth a chat. So when we revisit motivations, it's everything from, is there enough V4? How much does it cost? I was talking to a friend of mine this morning over breakfast, and we were talking about the cost of V4. I remember when we were talking about the cost being like $10 an address. We'll get to that in a minute, because my mind was blown when I saw some of the recent figures. And then there are some folks who are just looking at V6 because they have so many endpoints attached to the network. It just doesn't make any sense to use anything else. And in particular, when the IP connectivity is for managed purposes. You could talk about performance, you could talk about end-to-end. I remember back in 01, 02, 03, we were talking about V6, we're going to connect everything end-to-end. Yeah, it's cute. Maybe true in some ways, maybe not. But it all depends, right? There has been evidence about performance improvements. I just don't know if it's enough to move the needle. I don't know if it matters. It's really the top few that are kind of making a difference here for us here today. I think that's why we're here today, right? Content. I'll cruise through this. Google's view of the world, of things that are connected to it over V6. It's pretty good looking chart growth-wise. The Debbie Downer in me says, wow, 27 years for Google to get to 100%. Facebook, globally, 18 years. US, 8. All right, I'll still be alive in 8 years. And then there are other views, right? So Google, Facebook, others actively report on what they see, right? But the interesting thing is when you look at the top 10 carriers that each of these folks put data out as far as the consumer traffic, the percentage is high, right? So you're talking like top 10 ISPs that range anywhere from 61 to 77%. Some are in excess of 90%. It's crazy. So what's the problem? Like, why am I here? Honestly, I'm sure Patrick will heckle me later. Him and Tigger here, right? Thank you, Patrick, for lending me him. So why are we here, right? So the reality check. $51 an address? Is that real?
Yeah, sometimes.
Good Lord. Got in the wrong business, man. So that's staggering. I remember we were talking about addresses being like, $10 and $12 or whatever. That blew my mind right there when I started thinking. Because I haven't, like I said, I haven't touched anything V6 related in 5 years. So of course, I didn't care how much V4 addresses cost either. Until I saw that. I was like, wow. Eye-opening. So thanks to the folks there and for all the artwork there on the right. Again, more plagiarism with acknowledgments. But that was a real eye-opener. And on the heels of today into tomorrow with the Aaron crew, we'll talk. Maybe there'll be some commentary around V4 availability. But let's be honest, guys. That will eventually start to wean off, and you'll have piles of V4 addresses in different places, sure. But they're just it's a limited supply, as it always has been, right? So the V6 reality. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. So that's the history lesson. Hopefully, I'm staying ahead of schedule here. Otherwise, I'll get the hook later. So we're going to talk a little bit. This will be our transition to the next 10. So reality V6. Globally, 2 sites are 100% V6 enabled, YouTube and Facebook. On average, 50% of the sites in the top Alexa top 1 million are V6 enabled. US is quite a bit better, 3 sites. And I saw Bing there. I was like, wow, good job, Microsoft. Way to go. Average 64 to 68. And they all support V6. I don't know if anybody is familiar with the APAC space here. I am not as versed, but there's a site called Taobao, Taobao. I've never heard of it, but it seems to have 0 V6. We'll get back to that later. Anyway, so interesting, right? Interesting about the top. Now, if you consider the internet, so I am going to kind of point back to Bert from yesterday and his amazing keynote. He's a tough act to follow. But if you take this and you say, okay, well, the internet is like 3 companies, we're good. We're done. Go home, go have a latte over there in the break room, and I'll give you 31 minutes of your life back. But I don't think that's the case. So when you start to dig in deeper, if you look back many moons ago when we all got this party started, you said, okay, well, there's a lot of things that we were trying to kind of wrestle through here. Does the gear scale? Do we know how to operationalize V6? So if you look at World V6 Day and Launch, those events and the events preceding it were intended to really kind of get us ready for what I'm going to call basic V6. You can scale it in a very specific direction. So YouTube, Facebook, Google search, etc. can go turn it on, and a router's not going to blow up anymore. You won't have any machines crashing or what have you, right? But now, as we shift this view and take a different look at what does this all mean, I don't think anybody here would say it's impossible to deploy V6. It's actually not all that hard, right? Turning it on by default, it's really not that hard. V6 only is a different conversation. That's still hard. But when you look at comprehensive experiences. And I remember a friend of mine from AT&T, Shin Miyagawa, I remember years ago, we did a demo, or he did a demo of what Google Maps would look like behind some kind of category net. And like all the tiles were like slowly painting and some were missing. Imagine that as your experience on the internet when you're trying to make it a v6 only experience, but it's like half missing, right? So if you look at these stats, which I will not read because it's a bit of an eye chart, you'll have lots of sites that have embedded URLs. Some you see, some you don't. There's a lot embedded, whether you see it or not. Even Google's homepage, if you unpack that, there's a ton of stuff that is happening behind the scenes there, as you all know, right? I'm not going to tell this crowd in particular. But what ends up happening is as those resources are or are not v6 enabled, you now move away from the relevance of, can I deliver that at scale and speed? And now, is it a complete experience? And what the data here is telling us, it is not, right? So what ends up happening is it creates some complexity around how we view the next 10 years of v6. See the different characteristics for global sites versus US sites. I picked the US sites, frankly, because I was a little bit lazy. I was going to do North America because I am at Nanog, but there's no good data sources that conveniently grouped information by North America. So I took the lazy way out, at least for this. Long story short, you have a situation where you have sites that are in the top 10 global, top 10 US, that have incomplete experiences. So we took it a step further. And we said, hey, I took it a step further. And we said, hey, who is actually serving, what are the networks that are serving that content? In some cases, it's the company who owns it. In others, it's not. So if you look in the global view, you have Tencent, China Telecom, and Microsoft serving a huge portion of those that top 10 content globally. That's interesting. Go Microsoft. One of them doesn't support v6 at all, right? And when I point this out, it's not Microsoft sites. It's sites that are probably on Azure that are somebody else's top 10 sites globally. Okay, Microsoft supports v6. US, Amazon, Akamai, and Fastly. Like staggering numbers here, right? But that listing there for Amazon, for example, is not Amazon.com. It's stuff that's on AWS, right? They all support v6. I mean, and look at the numbers. 70% globally are on those, being served by those networks. 79% US. That's a lot. Again, this is not a measure of traffic. It's a measure of what I'll call experience. I'll skip over this slide, but basically the Cliff Notes version of this for your viewing pleasure later, in case you cannot sleep, is get the site, fetch all the unique names that are embedded with URLs within the site, look up, do they support v6 or not, and which networks are they on? Pretty simple, right? I'll probably end up posting some of this to GitHub at some point, and you guys can help me find bugs. I found a few of my own this past weekend. But anyway, it's interesting data, right? So what does this all mean as far as the next 10 is concerned, right? So what I found, and I almost wore my Facebook v6 shirt, giving Paul a shout out, and the others from Facebook who I worked with over the years. I don't think there's anybody here from Facebook. But they've done a pretty remarkable job at a really kind of a consistent v6 experience. I think, and I would say so is T-Mobile and other fixed line carriers. Why? Well, they're relying on it for other things. They're running the business with v6, right? Facebook is, T-Mobile is, other service providers are. So this conversation has shifted from can we deliver lots of bits fast to can we deliver all the bits comprehensively, right? And what I've seen, just in my travels, past 20 plus years, is if you're not using it, if it's not top of mind, if you're not eating your own dog food, and I'm drawing a blank on on the saying, right? Out of sight, out of mind. That's the saying I'm looking for. It's true with v6. If you're not actively using it on a day-to-day basis, you'll have a route that's down. You'll have an interface that's shut. You'll have something that's just not working the way it's supposed to. But when you're relying on it and it goes away and suddenly there's an outage that results, it's a big deal, right? So operationalization of V6 is a big deal. So sharing the preceding 20 minutes of information with you points to the time is we're at a kind of an apex here where you're moving towards trying to complete the experience, not just proving that you can do it, right? I think, I see many faces in the audience here. We know we can do it, right? But now it's about doing it completely, right? So interesting. So as we look ahead, right, and you'll see some stuff on the agenda for today here. Experience tells us that most V6 today has been a brownfield deployment. It's been turned on for something that was already V4. 10 years ago, that was probably a lot harder than it is today. It was certainly a lot harder than it is today. I can tell you, V6 only is still pretty hard. But what's going to get interesting is how people are going to start to use their V6 infrastructures to deliver V4. I don't mean to be controversial, but I think V4 is going to be around for a while, right? It's really how it's going to be around that matters. But if as I look and reflect back on the data that I've seen in preparation for this conversation, it's evident that in many cases, V6 was turned on. Hey, let's deliver some content for some eyeballs, but and many eyeball networks are dual stack, so you have a convenient fallback to V4. It was a nice safety net in 2011, 2012 for sure, right? But you got to ask yourself, what is that? Is that a crutch? Is that a handicap that's having some sort of adverse effect that we're now starting to see here? And interestingly enough, if you go back to the slide where I talk about all the networks that are serving this content, you now have this centralization to some extent that's happening. You have a handful of networks that are serving a substantial amount of the traffic. So there's an opportunity. There's an opportunity there for those networks, and sadly, Martin's retired, right? But you could, do the Cloudflare move and, turn it on by default for everybody. I think as part of the next 10 years, feels like something that's in the cards, right? You have addresses that are kind of gathering around certain networks for V4. Those same networks, if you go back, red is backwards, right? For this clicker thing? We're going to find out, yep. You have a handful of networks that are serving a substantial amount of the traffic, right? There's an opportunity here to kind of move this ball, right? Once you now have V6 operationalized, and now you're relying on it, I've heard more conversations this week than I was expecting about transition technologies. Again, I haven't touched anything V6 in 5 years. I'm hearing MAP-E, MAP-T, DS Lite. T-Mobile did 464 XLAT many moons ago. But the interesting thing about all these, they all require V6. And if it doesn't work, you're going to know, real fast, really painfully. And when I kind of again reflect back to World V6 Day and launch, it was dual stack was just the beginning. And maybe somebody from the audience can remember better than me. I don't remember anybody turning V6 only on for World V6 Day or launch. That was just crazy talk, right? But when you look back, then. But it definitely served this purpose. We learned. We proved ourselves that we can run networks that were V6 enabled, while making sure that we were continue to run the business on V4. But interestingly enough, here in the 3 short days that we've been in Minneapolis, I've heard a lot of people talking about transition technologies, many of which are going to ride over IPv4. IPv6. And I think what you're going to end up seeing is something similar to what Facebook did, right? Facebook has a rock solid v6 only implementation, and what I think you'll start to see as this trend continues again into the next 10 years, you'll see a lot more of it. You're going to see v6 being used, of course, to deliver content to its destination, but also as a way to continue to support v4 as long in this transition. You have a couple talks coming up from Fernando, so maybe I'll stir the pot here a little bit. That's an area of specialization that I sometimes try to entertain people with. But once you can operationalize things, a v6 only infrastructure, there's a lot of things that you can do interestingly with it. Looking back 5, 6, 7 years ago, there's a lot of conversations that were had then that seemed just obvious. We're still talking about them now. And I'll touch a little bit about that here, then hopefully leave some time for some questions and answers. But the intersection of the cost of v4, the availability of v4, and now with the ability to operate v6 under our belt, seems like an interesting time right now as we look into the next 10 years. Built on v6 only. It's interesting because there was a day, where we talked about v6 only, like to the internet. I was probably one of those people. I don't know to what extent when I thought we would get there. I do believe, we will get there. But when I looked at those numbers globally for Alexa, getting a v6 only experience globally, that's going to take a while, I think. But I think it can be done. And I think what you're going to find along the way is people are going to start understanding better how to use v6 as a tool to run their business. At the end of the day, that's what it was all about, right? Being able to continue to run, grow, and operate your business. One of the things that I think we'll have to acknowledge, and again, stirring the pot just a hair for Fernando, you're going to start seeing things like v6 innovations like segment routing, things that require a v6 infrastructure. Segment routing, and I can send some of this to the mailing list, but there was some work done in the IETF, some folks from different parts of kind of the internet ecosystem about using v6 only and segment routing for multicast. Things, and I know there's another friend in the audience who's delivering piles of IP multicast. It's non-trivial. It's actually not a simple infrastructure to run. And when you have the ability, based off of a pervasive deployment of v6, things like SR to simplify how you deliver v6 multicast become interesting. Not only that, but v6 and the vastness of it, even basic things, right? Like you don't have, if anybody runs a DHCP server anywhere and you ever worried about, pool exhaustion, you don't have that problem anymore. You take a prefix, pin it to a prefix, or an interface on a router, and when the router dies, throw it away, end its v6 prefix if you so choose to. With v4, you just don't have that luxury. So, again, using this as to induce some conversation, given where we're seeing a lot of the traffic today, you now have cloud infrastructure. You have, whether you build your own Kubernetes clusters or use it through AWS, Azure, Google, Oracle, whatever. I started looking at Kubernetes about 5 years ago, and hopefully I don't offend anybody with this, but I wouldn't mind a little bit of a discussion about it to Mike. I looked at Kubernetes networking and I said, wow, It's like, v4 only? Whose idea was that? I was like, it was perfectly suited for v6 and v6 only. And that's not just the v6 zealot in me talking. It's like, it just makes so much sense, right? You have the ingress controllers, the egress, where you do all this translation anyway. So one of the things that I hope, hopefully that we see in the next 10 years, right, is innovations like that, where you can take technologies that are, in many cases, just burning through address space. A lot of inefficiencies around translating from net 10 and whatever else to some kind of publicly pinned up address on the ingress controller. But if you look at something like Kubernetes and you say to yourself, wow, great opportunity for things like it to be v6 only, you can now start to talk about things like entire data centers being v6 only and having the edges be dual stack. I would never recommend that just for fun. But from a business point of view, it might be something that we really need to consider. So going into the back nine here, I got 10 minutes, I think. So this is a little bit more than 10 years from now. I really hope I'm not the guy giving this talk 10 years from now. So next June is 10 years from World v6 launch. It's really quite the bummer that we couldn't be here for this a few months ago for the 10th anniversary of World v6 Day. We'll figure something out. But when you look at the next 10 years, I think at least my view is, after looking at all this data over the past few months, getting ready to come here and see you all, I think the crystal ball says you'll see a lot more v6 operationalized for real use, for real service delivery. I can tell you that from my experience, it was that way from the beginning, right? We didn't have too many options other than making that happen. I think that will produce, the operationalization of v6 will produce more comprehensive v6 experiences, which ultimately will take us to a point where you can have a v6 only experience. And you'll see some innovation. And I hope the ones I put up there, I hope they're boring, and I hope cooler things, more useful things pop out from it over the next 10 years. And I hope there's somebody else up here talking about them other than me. And I think v4 is still going to be around in some way, shape, or form. I think you'll see v4 as a service carried over v6. I think based on the data that we're seeing, that looks like it could be a possibility. But again, I think you're going to see way more robust v6 experiences. So with that, thank you. Happy to take questions, or John, whatever is next on our list of things to do here.
We have one question at the mic. Go ahead.
Hey. Not sure if this is going to be a question or a rant disguised as a question. Oh, sorry, Chris Woodfield with Twitter. I think here in this room, network operators, for the most part, we're preaching to the converted. Nobody here questions the need to support IPv6, the desire to. We really got to take the fight at this point to applications and developers. You mentioned Kubernetes, which is, I would have brought up if you hadn't. A lot of other widely adopted applications, even open source. Hadoop, for example. I've heard mention that Facebook. I've heard mention that they have a fork to support Hadoop v6 support v6 in their fork of Hadoop, and have been working for years to try to get that fork merged back into the master branch for that application. So far, it hasn't happened yet. And that's one example off the top of my head, and I'm sure there are dozens and dozens of others. Or even if apps can listen on v6, internal applications that care about the client IP address. So someone turns on their app, if they're doing any sort of geolocation or abuse tracking or anything where they care, they have to parse, either the client address coming in or the X-forwarded header from the edge proxy forwarding the connection. That needs to be dual stack aware as well, and that's a challenge also.
So what's the answer, Chris? I mean,
I'm just pointing out these are the current issues. I'm wondering how any strategies, any advice for how to take this, and how to communicate the importance of it, other than you must do this because one day, a few years from now, we're going to be sending you v6 traffic and you have to be ready.
maybe we should do a next Nanog, we should have the Hadoop and the whoever else people show up here and tell us, explain to us. I'm sure somebody in this community knows who they are. If not, we could find them. But I mean, like I said to you at the very beginning of this, I'm not here to cheerlead or pep talk or whatever. But I don't disagree with you, right? I just at some point in time, it's people have to kind of get with the program, right? Mm-hmm. And not only that, but just having it implemented doesn't mean instantaneously it's rolled out to every Hadoop cluster on the planet. I mean, it takes time, man, right? So I think preaching to the choir, but I mean, or the converted, but not everybody's converted, right? And some people are here, right?
Okay. Right, thanks.
Let me alternate between online questions and.
By all means.
So we have at least a couple online questions. The first one from Matt Petak, who's currently unaffiliated. He asks, when you did your experiment, when the sample code you talked about with GitHub, did you fetch for those elements via v6, and did you check to see if the quad A records could be fetched via v6, or was there some IPv4 dependency in the mix that you may not have checked for?
Great question. So also, hi Matt, so happy to follow up on email as well, but basically it was a fetch of the page, a extraction of all the URLs and host names that went with it, and there was a connectivity check. So I was able to identify the dependencies based off of DNS and ultimately leveraged, somebody from Aaron like this. I was talking to Peter about this yesterday, who is to basically look up all the net names for the serving networks, etc. So yes, Matt, we did take, I did take into account the reachability and accessibility for that. I also used different name servers, so 1.1.1, 8.8.8, default name servers, etc., and user agents, 3 different user agents, Chrome, Firefox, and Safari, which surprisingly all produced very different results.
Next in queue at Mike in the room.
Not going to say my name.
Go ahead, Chris.
So what you know now, what would you have done 20, 30 years ago?
30 years ago, I wasn't working on it. 20 years ago, I was nothing. I wouldn't have done anything differently, right? I mean, the work that was done solved business problems, Chris, right? That's why I haven't touched anything v6 in 5 years. So I think different time, different problems now. So the question now is, what gets done now?
Okay. Next question online from Dan Magorian, who's with the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab. His question is kind of about deployment and perhaps the stifling with the growth of NAT, and also with the problems of firewalls and other security-related things that sort of kill end-to-end connectivity. And that there's this. It seems to have slowed the growth significantly for v6 on the enterprise, perhaps, and at least on the end user side, where there still may be islands with trace outs and stuff. Does this, are we at essentially a point where we can't reach certain points to actually have v6 deployed because of those types of issues that are occurring, or those type of technologies that are in the way?
two brief responses to that. The enterprise is actually a very interesting topic for V6, but I do also think that kind of the folks who run the cloud infrastructure that, by the way, many of these enterprises use, have a very interesting, distinct opportunity to kind of help move the ball there. I'll tell you from my personal experience, 15 years ago, yep, lots of firewalls, lots of load balancers, lots of whatevers that didn't do V6. As of 5 years ago, not so much, right? So, I hate to use the answer that was used years ago, but like as part of refresh cycles, you'd have to go almost out of your way, in my opinion, to put something in the network that doesn't support it. So I'm happy to follow up with that offline as well. But I think the enterprise question is absolutely a really good one, John, for us to unpack.
And in the room next to the queue.
Lee Howard, IPv4.global by Health Coast Stream Bank, which, if anybody doesn't know me, I'm not going to say anything bad about IPv6, of course. Agreeing with your, actually, kind of following on to that question maybe a little bit, that I think the economic drivers that you pointed out for all these other segments will probably gradually, increasingly apply to enterprises. Maybe not so much now, but I think that we'll get there. My question for you, though, would be more back to the other part of that, is the consumer side, I can see the economic drivers for the data center, for eyeball networks. What are the economic drivers for consumer electronics?
None.
None. I can't see. Do you see a way to get there?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you this much: if this thing still works, that's why I think if you look at the last, whoever has control here, can you go back to?
It's V4 as a service.
Yeah, that's it.
Right.
Yep. And I think the space that you're in, where you're kind of the marketplace for V4. Look, at 50 bucks an address, I don't blame you.
Right.
Where do I get some, man?
It's right. Sell your V4 so you can deploy V6. Like, why are you not doing this?
So yeah, crappy answer. I don't know, but it's truthful.
Next question online is a little bit of a theme, I think, that's forming. So you may be repeating yourself perhaps somewhat. But Gus Schlitman asks private sector affiliation, says, what message would you take to, or I assume that's maybe for him, what message would you take to companies' leadership to initiate the journey towards V6 conversion?
Well, that's easy.
I don't know if the slides can be shown on the projector.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I guess they're not up there. Bummer.
There we go.
Yeah, I'd give them that one.
That slide and show them that.
Yeah.
Hopefully, Gus can see that.
I mean, what Lee just said about the cost of V4. I mean, that's or the opportunity to. I don't want to say profit, but I guess kind of, and kind of use that to take things to where they have to go directionally for your enterprise or your company. Kevin?
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire. Yeah, the numbers up there are the cost of the sausage casings as far as a consumer is concerned. They have no concept of that. It's important for us, but not for them. We have always, I think, been very careful not to break stuff when we've gone to the dual IPv4, IPv6, all of that. Because there's been no economic driver, as you said, for many cases. So you do it slowly and methodically, and you go up, and your numbers were showing 20 years for many cases. And yet with TLS, we've just broken shit intentionally in the name of security, right? In the name of compliance, insurance. We've just moved ahead and said, sorry, your computer is now done. Good luck. So I think we're going to get to that point sooner rather than later, where we just can't keep holding on to that Windows XP computer or that Windows 98 computer and holding everybody back because we want to be okay for that person. But what really scared me, John, on these numbers, and I hadn't looked in a long time, the easiest people to encourage V6 is the content, and the number was 30%. That's pathetic, and that's not this audience by and large.
It is, though.
You put the slide back up on the screen.
It is a little. It is, Kevin. It is a little bit.
We make the networks available. We make the infrastructure available. In this room, we're not the ones who are turning on and off. Yes, Cloudflare And those types of companies have absolutely helped in getting it. But really all they're doing is a NAT translation the other way for those people who aren't web hosts. I don't know how many people in this room are web hosting sites that are on that Alexa 1 million that you were quoting.
So let me just color something in real quick. This is important to clarify. So the companies listed here are the networks serving the content for the top 10 the top 10 in the US on the right hand side.
Right.
If they turned it all on by default, you jump to 80%. Done. That's a lot. That's a big jump.
Right, but the fact that I go to one of those top 10 sites 100 times a day, there's still a million other sites. That's the really low number that you were shown on a different slide.
Yep.
Those million sites, if they all were IPv6, it would be a huge push up to drive this, and they're the easy ones. Changing billions of homes is hard.
Yeah.
Changing a million sites is not.
Yep. I don't think I'm going to argue with you on that one.
And I think we just have one last question online from Nicholas Intianello, who's speaking strictly on his behalf. He asks, do you think customer end equipment, the end premises equipment, like set-top boxes, cable, fiber, the home gear, does that encompass the needed updated V6 functions, or is there a need for that to be better on that end?
I think you got very comprehensive support there across, cable broadband. I was talking to, and I don't know if Chris is still here somewhere, but we were talking about fiber to the home equipment. I do believe that is the case. Cable infrastructure. Let me rephrase that. Broadband, fixed line broadband infrastructure. Absolutely. If you go back to the John, the earlier slide here, you'll see.
Up again.
Yep, I got it. This one, this top 10 list, and I promise to follow up with some email to the mailing list so that people can see this. You have a very large number of service providers that have absolutely enabled IPv6. They cannot do that without equipment that supports the same. So happy to provide some context there if we think that's useful on the list.
Okay, with that, I think we've come to the conclusion on behalf of those online and here in the audience. Thanks very much, John, for your time. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you.